Hey, I just want to let you know what's going on.
Okay.
So I walked into the school and there's a kid, I don't know, he's a big kid, probably like, I'm guessing he's maybe 16, 17. He may be as young as 15, but he seems older. He's kind of like operating on his own. There are several teachers who are like walking with him. He was talking like on his cell phone, calling his mother. He's basically saying things like, okay, well, I'm already suspended, so I don't really care. I'm going to do this. At some point, there was like a door that one teacher had gone through and he was not supposed to go through, and then the woman didn't shut it quick enough, and then he went through that door. I mean, it's like a little bit, I don't know exactly what's happening, but it's like a chaotic situation. So basically, I'm here in the room, which I guess is Ash's room.
Is she there?
No, she led me here. She brought me here in kind of like a back channel way, because there's this instructor who was walking with this kid up and down the hall, trying to talk him down, calm him down. At some point, the woman at the front desk like made a school-wide announcement for all students to stay in their room and have the door locked. So Ash brought me down to her room, and she's kind of explaining, you need to stay here by yourself. I need to go tend to this. This takes precedent over this interview. And so I'm in here waiting.
Hey, it's Trey Kay, and from PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting, this is Us and Them, the show that tells the stories about the things that divide us. And that recent phone call with my producer happened just before I was scheduled to talk to a teacher about school discipline. And, well, stuff happened. The situation I stumbled on settled quickly. More about that in a few minutes. But we're hearing more and more about situations in schools that end badly, sometimes tragically. I was a bit of a troublemaker in school. When I was in 9th grade, I recall getting extremely angry over something in Spanish class and threw a pencil at my teacher. And in frustration, I ran out of school and walked around a while and calmed down. And when I returned to school, no one said much of anything. It was as if nothing had happened. Today, a situation like that might have a completely different outcome, depending on my school's location and the color of my skin. A few years ago, before the pandemic, we knew we had a school discipline problem. Data from across the country showed students of color were getting suspended and expelled at much higher rates than white students. As that disparity plays out over a lifetime, it can have major consequences. It can mean poor people stay poor.
And it starts off with you missing school, and often you're missing school because you've been suspended.
Matthew Watts is the senior pastor at Grace Bible Church in Charleston, West Virginia.
Now your education is disrupted. It contributes to you being more likely to drop out of school. You drop out of school, now you higher unemployment, higher underemployment. But you're going to still procreate. Now you got children. Now you're probably on the social welfare situation. More likely you're going to end up in the criminal justice system. But even if you don't, you're stuck in the permanent underclass. And for the society, it contributes to the perpetuation and the depletion of the labor force, because you have a much lower labor force participation rate. And ultimately, it contributes to poverty.
We'll hear more from Reverend Matthew Watts later, but the point he makes raises a question. How do we discipline students who require it without denying them an education? And as violence continues, how do we make schools safer? Reasonable people disagree about the best school discipline approaches and the role suspension and expulsion should play. Arguments on both sides are getting more heated, and the stakes, and I'm talking about our kids and the future of our country, well, The stakes couldn't be any higher. When I was in school, we were in the middle of the Cold War. I remember we had drills to go down into the basement of the school in the event that Russia dropped a nuclear bomb. By the time my son was in school, he was occasionally leaving class for fire drills, and man, that just seems benign now. Today, even little kids know what to do in case there's a shooting in their school. And many more students, especially those in middle and high school, are seeing violence in their school. The pandemic introduced loneliness, isolation, and instability, all risk factors for increased violence. More than half of school leaders nationwide reported an uptick in classroom disruptions in a government survey last year. A third said there were more fights. George Floyd's murder in Minneapolis and the resulting racial justice protests made dozens of cities stop using school resource or liaison officers to patrol their schools. However, as violence continues, some school districts are reconsidering that move.
And reporter Jeremy Chen is live outside the school in the southwest part of the valley with new video tonight and what parents at the school are saying. Jeremy.
One man has been arrested in relation to the fighting that happened at the school, along with the
parents and students pack a meeting room tonight, angry and frustrated with crime on Santa Rosa high school campuses.
The push to address the violence in schools comes after a second day of
event center. Students say they're learning about serious incidents, not from school officials, but their peers.
We begin with breaking news out of St. Paul.
Within the last hour, we've learned a student at Harding High School was stabbed to death.
Grieving communities talk about next steps. Legislatures debate new laws. School boards hold meetings. Like this one, after that fatal stabbing in St. Paul, Minnesota.
In my 5 years of teaching, I've witnessed more than you might expect. Dozens of fights, student injuries, harassment, guns brought to school, pepper spray, threats, gang violence, drug use, students losing loved ones to violence, teachers losing former students to violence. And that's just this year.
My child, when he started high school, started virtual learning. He spent 2 years. We have lots of students who are behind because they really did lose 2 years of social emotional growth and maturity.
I have noticed on an everyday basis that our littlest ones and up to 5th grade are feeling the impact of violence in our schools and community. Violence that their minds are having a difficult time to process with so many big feelings such as fear, anger, and sadness. These prolonged feelings have led to significant increases in student anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation. As an elementary school counselor, this is what we deal with on an everyday basis.
I'm a freshman at Como Senior High School. I just really, and you know the normal of being in school, like at this point, when you see someone with a knife or a gun, like it's not even surprising at this point. Like you see kids dying all the time, people getting stabbed, people vaping, doing drugs, like it's normal now. But I don't want to normalize it. Yeah.
In many cases, after school violence, when students and teachers and family members talk, you hear not just sorrow and heartbreak. You can hear the glimmer of ideas and solutions.
We desperately need early interventions and funding, mental health supports, social workers, counselors, restorative practices. We need effective research-based restorative justice-focused accountability measures that show students what safety and healthy boundaries look and feel like. These interventions are effective at any level, but can you imagine the positive change we could see if we implement them while our students are at the beginning of their educational journey with us? This is the future that I dream of.
Let's connect with the resources around the city, around the county, and from the state to support that emotional growth development. We need to adjust what we expect.
We need discipline We need safety, and we need trust. Stop treating the district like a business. We are shaping the young, precious minds of the future. They are not data points. They are not dollars. Our students need more from us. Thank you.
At any given time, we have about 30 to 40 students roaming the hallways unsupervised. They are disruptive and combative. These students know that they will not receive consequences. Suspensions are rare. Students are returned to class without explanation. This lack of accountability is an equity issue. The 99% of students who come to school to learn and engage are being robbed of a free and safe education. We know that if a student does not feel safe, they cannot learn. The students who come to school but not to learn or go to class are making it an unsafe environment for all of us. Our children are hurting. The onus has been placed on teachers to fix our building security and behavioral issues, but teachers are overloaded and overwhelmed. We are doing everything we can. This year, it feels like 10% of what I do is actually teaching. With everything on our plates, we are not able to do our jobs.
When the kids come to school ready and wanting to learn, but are so far behind in reading skills, writing skills, and math skills, a single classroom teacher cannot bring them up to grade level. Because of this, many students are frustrated and have behavior issues. I am proposing that elementary schools need more academic assistant or paraprofessionals inside the classroom to specifically help these students. I'm not talking about mental health counselors or behavior specialists. Those are very important too, but they pull them out of the room. I am talking about academic support in the room so these kids' needs can be supported and the behaviors can be redirected before they even start.
There's certain things that teachers can't do or the programs can't do, but there's great community organizations out there doing a lot of good stuff. We have to want to hold law enforcement accountable. You got to hold our children accountable too. The people that are doing stuff, the kids that are acting crazy, hey, they got to be held accountable too, accountability.
There was consensus on a few things this Minnesota school district could improve. The big one? Pay more attention to what teachers and students are telling you. There's agreement that early intervention in the classroom supports academic learning and good behavior. Another point of consensus? Find a way to let teachers teach and hold disruptive students accountable.
And the tone of the country is screwed, but where we live doesn't have to be. We can be brothers and sisters to each other. We have to be, or we will not survive.
There was another suggestion, too. Maybe researchers are finding new approaches that have so far eluded school districts.
My name is Jayanti Owens, and I am an assistant professor of organizational behavior at the Yale School of Management.
Jayanti Owens is a sociologist who works on issues of race and inequality in school systems.
In order to be able to think through solutions that we can put into place to try to address some of the inequalities that we see within schools and other organizations more broadly.
Jayanti Owens is working with school districts nationwide on a study to gauge how race affects the response to school behavior. Working with professional filmmakers, she's produced videos that show students disrupting class in typical ways, throwing things, slamming doors, and fighting. Quite frankly, things that I did back in my day. And her team shows teachers the videos that are identical except for one thing: the race of the students. In one video, the students are white. In another, they're black. And in a third, they're brown, Latino. Owens is showing the videos to teachers in districts across the country.
When it was a Black student, teachers were much more likely to place the blame on the student. They would say things like, this student was purposely being disrespectful, they didn't care about learning, they were trying to disrespect me. Whereas when it was the white student, they were much likely to say things like, oh, the student must have been having a bad day, they must be stressed about something.
If teachers perceive students as misbehaving on purpose, they're more likely to get sent to the principal's office for discipline and more likely to get suspended or expelled. Owens calls her study double jeopardy, and that's because of her second finding. Not only are students of color more likely to be blamed for misbehavior, they're more likely to go to schools where punishing kids is routine.
We found that when students were being viewed by teachers who were in schools with large minority racial compositions, the teachers were more likely to assume that all students, regardless of the race of the student in the video, were to blame for the misbehavior than their counterparts who were in predominantly white schools seeing the exact same behavior. That suggested to us that there's something about the organizational climate of minority schools that make them more prone to sort of blaming students regardless of their individual racial ethnic background.
That double jeopardy for students of color explains why they are disproportionately disciplined. But Owen's study goes further. By assessing the circumstances in specific school districts or schools, literally showing how educators react to the 3 videos, Jayanti Owens can suggest solutions for particular problems. It could be that a school district has one prejudiced teacher or administrator. Another district might have an overly punitive climate. Owens says the important thing is tailoring solutions to problems.
It implies pretty different sort of mechanisms for intervention.
So why would solutions or interventions vary from building to building when the problems are historical and structural?
Absolutely. So because of the differences in the historical context, which you are so right to point out is, hugely important, the intervention kind of needs to align with the historical context that got us to that point, and also the receptiveness of the people, the actors in that context. So we can give tailored evidence to districts that say, based on what your teachers and based on what your administrators told us in the data collection efforts, here are the mechanisms that are most likely to be at play in your district, and here are the types of interventions that are most closely aligned with those mechanisms.
One of the things that we're observing is that in some states and school districts, the data on discipline disparities is so alarming that suspensions and expulsions are not options anymore. So, for example, if a teacher sends a student out of the room, school administrators might send the student right back to the classroom, and then sometimes the student ends up roaming the hallways. Mm-hmm. I guess I'm wondering, has the pendulum swung too far? I mean, should expulsion and suspension be a part of what schools do?
It's a great question, and I would say that for me, what's really prominent in the study findings is that even when a student doesn't get disciplined, even when a student doesn't get ultimately suspended or expelled, the process of being negatively labeled in the classroom by the teacher can still have really dramatic consequences for the student. So even if you get sent out to the principal's office and then the principal sends you right back in, your classmates know that you got in trouble. You know that you got in trouble. That changes the nature of your relationship with your teacher. It changes the way that you're seen by the teacher. It potentially changes the way you see yourself as a student. So there's really negative consequences that can come even from that labeling process, irrespective of whether a suspension or expulsion actually takes place. The process of being labeled or blamed for something because of the color of your skin has really dramatic consequences psychologically, socially, in terms of your perceived standing within your school context that can't be kind of eradicated by simply removing the policy that allows for a suspension.
Okay, but I feel like there would be people listening to this who would remind me and would want to ask you that the problem is that teachers and students are feeling unsafe because of the action of this one student. Mm-hmm. What can we do about that?
So this is where I think it becomes a sort of broader issue of developing that relationship of trust between students and teachers, between students and other authority figures in the school, between families and teachers. So that's not to say the safety concerns aren't real, but it's to say that the safety concerns aren't happening in a vacuum. And that in order to change that safety concern, you might need to actually start by thinking about the broader context of the relationships within which those safety concerns exist. We need to take a step back and think about the broader picture, not sort of putting out that immediate fire, but thinking about how can we prevent the fire from occurring in the first place.
This whole discussion can start to feel like the question of which came first, the chicken or the egg. But since Jayante Owens brought up the importance of context, let's look at the situation in West Virginia. It turns out that although West Virginia is one of the whitest states in the nation, it tracks with the rest of the country on how black and brown students are disciplined at twice the rate of white students. But there's another way to look at the discipline data. Low-income students are far more likely to be expelled or suspended, regardless of their race, than students from more privileged families. And remember, missing school has a big impact on prospects for the future. Researchers say students who miss just 2 days a month are less likely to graduate, and that affects the rest of their lives.
My name is Joe Ellington. I'm a delegate from the 38th District, West Virginia, Mercer County, current chair of the House Education Committee, and I'm a physician, obstetrician, gynecologist by trade.
In the 2023 session, Delegate Ellington co-authored a new state law to make school discipline more rigorous.
The whole purpose of this is really to decrease any violence against the teachers, against other students, create a safer environment.
Joe Ellington is a Republican for Mercer County in the southeastern part of the state. Ellington says he hears from teachers who feel intimidated by violent students.
They say it's just gotten to a different environment, that the things have changed over the years, and they just find it's getting out of control.
Do you know, or do they have any reason as to why they think it might have increased, why incidents have increased?
Probably because there's lack of accountability to these students. I think a lot of the teachers are concerned that nothing happens to these students. There's no discipline at home or corrective behavior, and they may not be getting the support from their administration that they would expect. And that's what we're trying to put back into the school system.
The new law covers students in the 6th through 12th grades. Here's how it works. If a teacher sends a disruptive student to the principal, that student cannot return to class that day. If there are more than 3 incidents in a month, there's a consultation with parents or guardians, and the student may not be allowed to return to that school. The law says an alternative learning setting may be found. Everything is carefully documented in a state database so that patterns of misbehavior can be recognized.
The goal is also to make it safe for the teacher and the other students so that an environment is good for them to learn. And that's essentially what this is doing. So it's putting it back to the teachers can teach, administrators take care of the dealing with the discipline, and the parents are involved.
Counties will decide what kind of alternatives to provide disruptive students. Delegate Joe Ellington says their education is important, too. He hopes the new law will help make schools safer and provide an environment for all students to learn.
My name is Tom Williams, and I'm superintendent for Kanawha County Schools.
Kanawha County is the largest and most diverse school district in West Virginia. Tom Williams thinks the new legislation will help teachers teach.
Well, I think it will give them more opportunity to work with the administrators in the building to come up with solutions to help our kids.
Williams says students are behind academically and socially since COVID. And studies show that there's more mental illness and drug abuse in families because of the pandemic.
Well, students are a product of their environment. And when they come to us from a less than stellar environment, then they're going to have more issues. Behind each discipline issue is a story. You have to look at that story to see what caused that discipline issue. What was Johnny going through at home that morning? Did they have breakfast? Did they sleep all night? Or were their parents fighting? Or were their parents even home? Was there something going on in the neighborhood? were their parents strung out on drugs? I mean, we've gone through the opioid epidemic here in West Virginia, and it's slammed all of our communities. And you have to look at that story and make sure that you're treating kids fairly. That doesn't mean the same. That means fairly.
Superintendent Williams is hopeful that the new law will give schools all over West Virginia the guardrails they've long needed, but need even more now since the pandemic. Guidelines that will provide consistency along with flexibility.
We go from extremely rural to very urban and everywhere in between. And so each school community is different, and each school staff, administrators, teachers, cooks, custodians, counselors, nurses, they know what's best for their community. That's how they have to approach discipline, I think. That's what our administrators have to figure out, what works in your community.
Remember where we began this episode? It was me waiting for a teacher at the Chandler Academy in Charleston. And that teacher, she was helping a student.
Well, it is a safety concern when students are having mental health episodes.
After a break, we'll visit Chandler Academy. It takes students who've been expelled from traditional high schools. And that student who caused the lockdown, he's okay.
He just said, I don't want to be cornered, and you're really, it's starting to make me angry, and I don't want to hurt you. I just want to walk. I said, fine, we'll walk, and I'll give you your parameters, and we'll walk.
You're listening to Us and Them. This show is supported in part by the West Virginia Humanities Council, the CRC Foundation, and the Daywood Foundation.
Music lifts us up and brings us together, even when we can't get together in person. Mountain Stage brings you live performances on the air, online, and in our podcast. They remind you how it feels to be in a live audience listening to live music. This is Larry Gross, host of Mountain Stage. Find a link to our stations and our podcast online at mountainstage.org.
Hey, it's Trey, and this is Us and Them from West Virginia Public Broadcasting and PRX. There are many schools of thought when it comes to discipline in classrooms. Debate doesn't break down into the usual polarizing ruts, punitive versus permissive, tough versus tolerant. There's much more to it than that. We know kids of color are expelled and suspended at higher rates than white kids, but family income is a factor too.
But it has even a more profound socioeconomic undercurrent in a place like West Virginia, where, yes, black students are disproportionately suspended, but low-income white students make up the overwhelming majority of children that are suspended.
That's Reverend Matthew Watts, senior pastor of Grace Bible Church in Charleston, West Virginia. He's a longtime civil rights leader and no stranger to the state legislature. He's fought to close the wealth gap in housing, job training, and economic development. He has stopped focusing on race in order to get things done. You've even said to me, you know what, I'm going to stop advocating for black people.
That's correct.
Why is that?
Because to advocate for black people in the state of West Virginia is a sure way to guarantee that nothing will get done. Then you got a toxic stew where the kids aren't getting educated at all because their suspension rate is so high. And so what we're trying to do is to really unmask it so people realize that we have to have a stronger coalition, because when it's only about African Americans, people expect for African Americans to receive desperate treatment, and they expect for them to be overrepresented in anything negative. That's normalized into the system. So you can't move the system talking about what's happening to black people. We had 400 years of that conversation. But when you add in these other constituent groups, then it makes the population so loud that it can't be ignored.
Reverend Watts is almost ready to retire, but this issue of school discipline is really important to him. He says guilt plays a role. That's because when he was working with black kids more than 20 years ago, he did not believe what they were telling him.
Some of the children in the community that we were working with in our youth groups kept saying, Reverend Watts, we're just not being treated fairly in school. I mean, they're over-disciplining us. We're getting suspended for silly stuff, right? And I just couldn't believe what they were telling me. And I would say to them what my mother would have said to me: stop being a knucklehead. Pull your pants up, stop sitting in the back of the class, sit in the front, pay attention, be respectful, yes sir, no sir, yes ma'am, no ma'am, and just be a solid citizen.
In 2015, Reverend Watts and others began paying attention to the reports coming out of academia and the U.S. Department of Education. Those reports documented racial disparities in school discipline. For years, he tried to get data from West Virginia, and when he finally saw what was going on, he was appalled.
In every county where there was any significant number of African Americans, they had at least 2.5 to 3 times higher rate of suspension than non-African Americans. And then when we looked at the counties where there was a small number of African Americans, the suspension was off the chart. So they had no advocacy there. They had no people that looked like them inside of the system. And we said, this is actually, it's a crisis.
If poor people, black and white, have this as a common problem where their young students are being disproportionately expelled from school, what can happen from that? What can the result be?
What can the result be if they continue to be disproportionately suspended and no action taken?
That's
is
right.
That result? What can happen and what is actually happening is we're seeing the perpetuation of systemic generational poverty and no way for it to change. And it's getting progressively worse in this state. I call student school suspensions the silent social underlying condition, unrecognized, unaddressed, and not even fully understood. No one is paying attention. This is what's going to destroy West Virginia. No one is paying attention to the crisis among poor white people and how disconnected they are from civic engagement, now been disconnected from education, been disconnected from educational opportunity. No one is paying attention. And that's the population that if they're not educated and empowered, we don't have the workforce to drive this state. The poorest counties, you find they have these poor education levels, low income levels, low education levels, but when you back all the way up, they have high rates of kids being suspended from school. That's where it leads you. And it starts retreading itself because it's normalized into the system. So people don't understand what's really driving this at the root. People are being undereducated. It's that simple. It's not rocket science. If you don't go to school enough, you don't hear enough instruction, you don't learn enough, therefore your skill level is low.
But what we seem to be hearing, and especially since COVID, more communities are reporting school violence. And there seems to be a tension between helping students feel safe in the classrooms and reforming how disruptive students are disciplined. There are certainly people who are advocating that we need to make the classroom a safe place for learning.
I agree 100%. The safety of the teachers and the safety of the other students is paramount.
There's, it's at Ellington. He is from Monroe.
Good guy, Mercer County.
Mercer County.
Good guy, medical doctor.
But he says that that disruptive kids can be dangerous. And at best, they interfere with others' ability to learn. What are your thoughts on that?
What I'm trying to get them to realize is that we already have in place enough laws and we have in place enough policy, but we're not utilizing what's already in the toolbox. So why pass another law? Why not enforce the law that's on the book? Let's get the plan and let's get teachers to have some input into this plan and let's see if we can address their concerns. What Dr. Ellington and them are saying is true and no one can argue against it, but passing another piece of legislation that basically just going to suspend more children is not necessary because a child can be suspended now for talking too loud to the teacher. A child can be suspended now for just about anything the principal wants to suspend them for. There's nothing that limits what a principal can suspend a child from the school system now. We don't need this law.
I have a colleague, her son actually does this type of work with disruptive kids in high school, and it is his experience that the students don't really care if they're suspended. They don't want to be in school, and quite often their parents are indifferent about it as well. And I'm wondering if that's the case, what is it what more can be done to try to remedy this so that it is not something that is continuing to perpetuate a problem generation after generation?
So what's happened, I believe, that the school system antiquated itself. It's no longer the system that we need, but we're still educating people basically the way we did, at the turn of the 20th century, right? So the schools don't need to be reformed. They really need to be re-engineered, and they need to be redesigned. And we got to look at education differently. And I don't think that we can mass educate people like we did in the past. So to your point, I say there needs to be a hybrid. Some schools need to have alternative education inside their schools. In Kanawha County, they have the Chandler Academy. It's an alternative school for the most disruptive children in Kanawha County schools that have been suspended from their home school. They've been sent to the academy to see if they can help them to stay focused, to keep moving through the education system, right? There needs to be alternative education because we got more children today that are violent than were in the past. And some of them are violent because they were traumatized as children. Some of them are among the 1 in 5 babies in West Virginia is born with opioids in their system, and we have a drug problem 10 times higher than the rest of the nation, kids born with drugs in their system. We have problems. And when I say this, people get angry with me. We have created an inferior group of people. They are. They're inferior because of what's happened to them in the social construct in which they have to live. Too much violence, too much drug trafficking, too much child abuse and neglect. And now it's multiple generations it's happened to people, and they never got out of the neighborhood and the community.
Reverend Watts and I talked about Chandler Academy. It's Kanawha County's only alternative public school for at-risk students. Budget cuts almost forced the program to go entirely virtual for next year. But Chandler teachers and parents have persuaded the school district to keep it open. Chandler and its staff specialize in handling students with discipline problems. Student enrollment at Chandler varies because students come and go throughout the school year. Most of the time, there are about 100 9th through 12th graders attending class. 3/4 of the kids are white, and most of the other students are black. We started this episode at Chandler. Remember when the school I was visiting was on lockdown? Well, that was here. And I was sent to a classroom to wait for teacher Ash Setterstrom.
I think what was somewhat scary for me was that the woman who was at the reception basically got on the intercom and told everybody to go into their classrooms and lock their doors.
That's pretty standard that, they'll announce for kids to clear the halls, close the doors, just so, there are no open doors. There are no classrooms available that those students can run into, especially when they're upset with another student and we're in a mad dash trying to figure out who that student is and find out where that student is so we can, try to prevent those things from happening. So
You seem
intense.
You seem flustered by this.
Well, they're very intense occurrences. I mean, your adrenaline gets pumping, and it's just kind of crisis to crisis some days, and some days not.
Ash Setterstrom has been teaching history at Chandler for 6 years.
What does school discipline mean to you in your classroom?
Reinforcing positive behaviors, helping my students to understand accountability, finding the hook, getting them to participate, because generally kids don't value education. More often than not, they come from families that don't value education. So they don't have any reason. But again, so much of it is relationship building. They have to be invested in us before they are willing to invest in the world history, the civics, the algebra 2s, and all of the other things that we do. They have to at least like us before they'll start to perform. But it's so much bigger than them doing the work for us. Eventually it clicks for them that they are doing something positive for themselves. They don't come in here with attitudes of self-love, where they are coming in and working for themselves, working to meet a goal, learning the satisfaction of meeting a goal. So, the hook is us first.
Most of the people who work at Chandler have been here for a long time. They are passionate about what they do. As Ash and I were talking, the school counselor came in. Billy Walker has been at Chandler for 33 years.
Did I see you speaking to that young man?
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So can you tell me what happened?
Well, I can't go into great detail about what
I don't know names or anything like that.
He's one of our success stories. If you could see where he started as a sixth grader. As a sixth grader, we started having him, and he's been with us off and on ever since. He's very emotional right now because things in his home life are a little unsettled, and then things happened here at school. And part of what we do is sometimes, as Ms. Setterstrom was saying, but part of it is kind of detective work, trying to figure out, put the pieces together, because he's not always going to tell you what you need to know in that moment. But my job was to keep him safe and to make sure that he didn't have any run-ins with anybody along the way that would make them unsafe. I know that he's not going to hurt me, and so I just had to kind of stay with him.
Did you see me walk into the building?
Yes, I did. Mm-hmm.
And so when I came in, that was kind of when he was coming down the hallway?
Yes.
He had a cell phone out, and sounds like he was calling his mother.
Yes, that's correct. Mm-hmm.
And he said something like, I think I'm already been suspended. I don't want to make it worse. Can you elaborate on that?
He didn't say that. He said, I want to make it worse.
Oh.
Yes. He said, I want to make it worse, is what he was saying. Yes. That's what he was saying. He says, I want to make it worse.
Was it you who walked into the office and or somebody who walked in the office with him?
Yes.
And was like trying to maybe get him to go into a room and calm down, and he didn't want to do that, and he wanted to basically walk up and down the halls?
He was too agitated to sit, but he didn't want to do anything to hurt anybody either, as in me. And so he just said, I don't want to be cornered, and you're really, it's starting to make me angry, and I don't want to hurt you. I just want to walk. I said, fine, we'll walk, and I'll give you your parameters, and we'll walk.
And so here we are at the Chandler Academy, and the main reason that anybody is here is at this school is because they've had some type of problem at one of the other schools that's in the county. And the way that you seemed to deal with him was tried to take your keys and your clues from him to de-escalate the situation.
That's correct, yes. Yes, because I know him very well. I've worked with him since he was in sixth grade, and I have a very good relationship with him, and he trusts me, and he doesn't want to hurt me, and he knows that I'm not going to do anything to hurt him. I've had situations where I've specifically said to him, I'm not going to let you put your hands on another kid. I'm going to stand in front of you because I know you're not going to hurt me. He said, no, I won't. You know I won't. I said, that's exactly right. I said, so every time I'm going to stop you from doing that because I don't want you to hurt yourself. I don't want you to hurt somebody else.
So that's this situation.
Yes.
Do you ever feel afraid in a different situation?
Never, ever. I've never felt afraid, ever. I feel like here, the first and the most primary thing that we do is build relationships with our kids. We love them, we care about them, they know that. And so as long as we have that as our first and foremost responsibility, they know that they're safe, and they know that the way that we interact with them, that we're going to keep them safe. When it's over, it's over. Tomorrow's another day, and we love them unconditionally. When you have that relationship and you have that unconditional love, you know that you're safe, and I know I'm safe. I know he's not going to hurt me.
Billy Walker thought she'd seen it all, but says the pandemic was a game changer.
During that time period, kids, they lost the ability to communicate. They don't know how to communicate with each other. The only method of communication they have now is digital. They don't understand how to talk to each other. You know, for such a long period of time, they didn't have to. They didn't have that one-on-one interaction, but they craved it. They couldn't wait to be back in the building. They hated being at home. They hated being behind their computer screen. But it's like they have to relearn. They have to relearn how to interact with each other. They have to relearn that the things that they were doing on a day-to-day basis, they can't do on a day-to-day basis because there's other people that they have to take into consideration. That's what they lost. They lost that ability to understand that it's not just about me, it's about everybody in the room.
Could one of those challenges or things that they got disconnected from or that they needed to relearn is how to back down from an argument?
Yes, absolutely, which is where we come in. And again, that's where the relationships come in.
Chandler is for students who've been expelled or removed from one of Kanawha County's 8 high schools or 13 middle schools. Chandler's goal is to get students stabilized and send them back to their home schools. But more often than not, that system turns out to be a vicious cycle. Here's Chandler's principal, Wayman Wilson.
Every week we get a number of kids coming in, and by the time we feel like we're trying to accomplish something with the kids that are here, and it starts all over again with the same old behavior that we've been trying to work with. When we see progress, it's down the drain when a bunch of other kids come in.
And then you just start the process all over again. Then you have to be mean face, and then you have to be nice face, and then you have to be vulnerable teacher, and I mean you have to go through all the motions to build these relationships with these kids and then get things to level out again.
Most of the students at Chandler come from low-income families, and about a quarter are Black. Some struggle with mental illness. Others have been stigmatized after being expelled from their old school. Almost all of them struggle with low self-esteem.
They will say that they believe themselves unsalvageable. You know, I have a young man that we were just talking about earlier today in one of our meetings, that he said that to me. He said, Mrs. Walker, you need to stop caring about me. You need to stop worrying about me. You need to stop because I'm dark. I'm not salvageable. And I said to him, I said, that's not going to happen. I said, I love you and I care about you, and there's nothing you can say or do that's going to make me stop caring about you. I said, you are salvageable. I said, there is nothing about you that has to be this way. You can change. You can be something different.
Those kids who get in trouble, I was one of them. The teacher we just heard from, Ash Setterstrom, she was one of them too. She says she hated authority as a kid and loved getting suspended. She spent her middle school years in the late 90s at an alternative learning center. So when it comes to school discipline, what are the best approaches? It comes down to taking care of students, meeting them where they are, and building relationships. That's something that takes more time and resources than many schools seem to have right now. I keep coming back to comments made earlier this year during a public meeting in St. Paul, Minnesota, after a student was stabbed to death at one of the city's public high schools. We heard some of them earlier in this episode. Students, teachers, and parents came together to express grief, anger, and fear. But there were also ideas and observations and suggestions. There are kids and teachers in classrooms today who need us to understand what they're up against. They need us to root for them and to figure out how to help them. One way to begin might be to listen hard to what they're telling us. You've been listening to Us and Them. Our team for this episode was me, Trey Kay, Lori Stern, Matthew Hancock, and Kate Smith.
Thanks to Dr. Thomas Williams and Brianna Warner of Kanawha County Schools.
Michael Lipton, Tristan Lozow, and Ahmed Solomon wrote and performed the Us and Them show music. Mark Lerner designed our logo. The marvelous people at PRX and West Virginia Public Broadcasting make Us and Them possible. So do grants from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, the West Virginia Humanities Council, the CRC Foundation, and the Daywood Foundation. We'd love to hear your thoughts about this episode. Share them with us on our Facebook page. Tweet to us at UsThemPodcast. Us and Them was originally developed with assistance from the Mentorship Program at AIR, the Association of Independents in Radio. We'll see you next time on Us and Them.
Support for this podcast comes from the Corporation for Public Broadcasting.